All right, this is Mo with Pyromaniac. Today I've got Matt Harrison. Matt Harrison is one of the brain children, I suppose, behind League Safe and League Safe Post. You can find him in some other places, like the Fantasy Football Weekly radio show. Matt, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and either League Safe or Fantasy Football Weekly?
Yeah, definitely one of the children, as my childish attitude goes for. I've been at LeagueSafe for about 2.5 years. Our founder, Paul Charchian, I worked with him on a couple different sites before. Fantasy Victory I wrote for him at, and I went back. I was one of the last interns at the good old fanball.com days, if any of you fantasy footballers remember that far back. And I've been doing the Fantasy Football Weekly radio show for 2 years now, and that's been pretty fun over at KFAN 100.3 in Minneapolis, and longest-running fantasy sports radio show in the world, as far as we know. It's been going for 20 years, so we've been doing it for a long time. Charch has been on it since basically the very beginning. And it's just high quality, good stuff. If you haven't found it on iTunes or KFAN.com, you should check it out. It's great weekly content. We're in the off season now, so we only go through week 16. But yeah, definitely something to look at.
Yeah, I found you guys, and at first I was a fan, and I found you through iTunes, and then KFan has an app, iHeartRadio, I believe. They've got a good app. And you can listen to it live, and that comes Saturday morning, and the time can vary, correct? But it's only during the regular season.
Yeah, we do preseason shows too. We get pushed around sometimes for they're the radio home of the Minnesota Golden Gopher football team, so we get pushed around due to the time changes on the football games. So if the Gophers play at 11 a.m. Central Time, we get pushed to the very early and very uncomfortable 7 a.m. time slot on Saturdays. So
hard to function at that time. Let alone
a lot of caffeine.
Well, let's get down to the nitty-gritty then. We were doing a podcast recently, kind of, I don't know, a metacognitive look back on the season entitled Woulda, Coulda, Shoulda. So if you could, go back in the DeLorean and fire it up to 88 miles an hour and start over in your draft, what would you do different this year?
I think one of the things that we kind of figured out along the way is drafting. If you're drafting at the tail end of the first round, we like to do something called do the opposite, which you've probably heard if you've done if you've listened to KFan for a while. This year was one of the prime do the opposites where you could have gone tight end, and it would have worked out for you. You could have gone Gronk and Graham, for instance, and you would have built yourself a really, really fine team, because running backs are always sketchy. There was a lot of good quarterbacks this year. There was a lot of good quarterback finds, and wide receiver has been as deep as it's ever been, maybe, with the emergence of all the rookie receivers that came out this year, Odell Beckham, and I mean there were 15 to 20 good players who weren't rookies coming into this year's draft that you could have waited on wide receiver. You probably can figure out with quantity what you're going to do with running back. Quarterback was as deep as you could do, and I think that it definitely was a year that if you went tight end, and put every other team in your league at a complete crazy disadvantage, you were probably coming out ahead of the game and making the playoffs at the very minimum.
See, that's interesting. Around the Pyro offices, we had a lot of guys complaining about taking Jimmy Graham first because of the late season letdown. But I'm of the mind that says you're at such an advantage. If you get Graham, Gronk, they are, and even the Denver guy, Julius Thomas. Thank you. They are at such an advantage at the position over the other tight ends. It really sets you apart from the rest of your league.
The positional differential is absolutely huge. In baseball, that becomes more so with the several different positions in fantasy baseball, and it's something that has kind of rolled into fantasy football too.
What about drafting a quarterback early? One of my leagues, I had the 11th pick, and I took Drew Brees. And even though he finished top 5, I finished out of the playoffs. And a lot of those guys, I mean, besides Aaron Rodgers, Peyton let you down late in the season. Personally, I think there was a bit of a fall off on the notion of drafting quarterbacks early. Where do you like to take a quarterback in the draft?
I like to go as late as possible with quarterbacks now. There's so many good ones. There's 15 solid quarterbacks that you can use on an every week basis. And I mean, if you think about it, Phillip Rivers, I think his ADP was in the 7th or 8th round this year. He finished as a top 12 quarterback. So in a 12-team league, he's a starter. Ben Roethlisberger was probably just as late. He finished 6th. Ryan Tannehill was probably not drafted in most leagues. He finished 8th. Eli Manning, everybody forgot about. He finished 10th. So you can find quarterbacks, and you can kind of just go with 2 quarterbacks and mix and match and play the matchups. I mean, people got good fantasy games out of Mark Sanchez this year. People got good fantasy games out of Kyle Orton. Teddy Bridgewater showed that he's coming up a little bit. And so you can find quarterbacks that they're easier to unearth than some of the other positions.
My last question regarding the draft would be running back, and I'm still big on going running back 1, but we had so many crazy off-the-field things happen, and injuries, and Justin Forsett, and guys popping up out of nowhere. The Minnesota guys for a while, Agiata was good. You can pick up waiver wire guys. I'm of the mind for once I get that first running back, I'm holding off on my running back 2 until far later in the draft. We've got a lot of guys that go opposite, though, and they like to take the running backs early. Where are you with your first and second running back? Do you like to take them quick, get the top guys, or do you hold off?
It's always good to have the big names. I tend to find myself as I went on this year, I tend to think more along the lines of the bigger running backs are more important to me. Not big names, but actually bigger people. They were more important to me than some of the smaller guys because the smaller guys tend to take injury a little bit more. Le'Veon Bell was a guy I rode in one league, and that was nice to have. Gio Bernard was one of my top picks in another league, and he's a smaller guy, and he got hurt. And I've been kind of learning along the way, and this is one of those sports games that you kind of just continue to learn, that I like the bigger backs, and the bigger backs that you have in your backfield, if you've got a lot of them, if you got Alfred Morris, if you got Mark Ingram, if you got Joique Bell, power backs who don't get nicked up nearly as much, they tend to last a little bit longer, and they're a little bit more dependable. You want dependability out of your running back position, I think, and that's kind of how I start steering my teams.
And takeaways from the season, one of my big mistakes, I think, I went for some of these explosion-type players. I fall in love with rookies real early, Patterson, Cooks, and unless you pick the right one, it ends up kind of hurting you. So one thing I learned from, or my takeaway, is to get some of the guys that aren't going to be as flashy, but they're dependable. Don't always go overboard on the breakout guys. You may not get the oohs and the ahs in the draft room taking some of those more traditional guys, but you're going to be better for it in the long run. Is there anything you would do different looking back on the season?
Well, I think if you draft a whole bunch of a giant team full of really just safe guys, that you're going to have a safe team that doesn't win the championship. You have to calculate where you're going to take your chance. And if Cordero Patterson was your guy that you calculated on taking a chance, well, he missed this year, and your team probably suffered because of it. But there are years where you could take the guy who is just on the verge of becoming great, and it pans out for you. I think of Arian Foster and Jimmy Graham, who were each guys that you kind of had to take a chance on back in their big breakout years, and those guys won fantasy championships for people. So you got to get a little bit lucky in fantasy football, but you have to find the guy. You have to try to unearth that one guy and be right. You can't take too many chances, but if you're going to take one or two, I'm okay with that, especially as you move to the mid and later rounds. I'm trying not to do that in the first 4 rounds of a draft if it's me.
So the old Greek philosophy, having the balanced life, right? Having a balanced roster.
Yeah, balance your risk and your safety. Kind of like a good portfolio, right?
There you go. One thing that's kind of taken the fantasy world by storm is the weekly leagues that are still kicking even now. You guys do the Almost Daily podcast, and you've got a Thursday one, which is really great for FanDuel-type leagues where you can redraft every week. How do you see the strategy being a little different if you are drafting per week versus once at the beginning of the season?
Well, daily it differs every week. I mean, it also differs by game. If you're playing in 50-50 games, or if you're playing in the big shooters where you're going for a big prize. In those, which I tend to steer more toward, because I usually play small time ones, $2 one, that kind of thing. But I put in 5 to 10 teams a week maybe, and I try to I'm learning a lot from my co-hosts on that show, Christian Peterson and Brian Johnson, about let's look at who do you think might be the most drafted player this week, and do I need to have him, or do I need to fade away from him and find some other guys? What value plays can I get? And it's a lot about roster construction on the weekly basis. I try to fill in my value guys first, so I know what I have left for some of the bigger guys. But I've seen people go, you know what, I need Arian Foster in my lineup this week, and I know he's $8,000, and I'm going to put him in, and I'm going to build a roster around him. So you can do it both ways. It's very interesting because you can do it both ways in the same week. You can build a team of safety. You can build a team with high risk. You can build a team of all Broncos if you want. And I know I've seen a couple of big winners on some of the sites who have gone heavy on Patriots or heavy on Eagles and stuff like that, and that works out every once in a while, and so it's something to take a look at. So,
if you're going to spend the bucks on one of the daily leagues like FanDuel, are you going to spend it at the running back position, quarterback, wide receiver, or does it really just vary?
It varies week to week based on the matchups. I mean, if there's a week where you have 7 or 8 running backs who just have great matchups, and some of them kind of fall into that middle or lower tier of price, maybe it's not the week that you spend on running back. Maybe it's the week that you go get the 1 or 2 wide receivers that are the guys you need to have on your roster that you're going to have to pay for.
Couple more questions for you here, Matt. At Pyro, we're always looking for new formats, new leagues to join, and we're getting into Dynasty. We've got a guy, Houdini, who is sort of our Dynasty guru. You guys do something called the Empire League. You want to explain what that is for us?
Yeah, the Empire League's kind of a standard Dynasty league where you hold over all of your guys year to year. So you keep them forever. The catch in the Empire League is kind of 2 things. First, we have a rolling Emperor pot that we call it, and half of all of our entry fees going to this rolling Empire pot. So, and I think in our league that we started at LeagueSafe 3 years ago, our entry fee is $150. We have 12 members, so approximately $900 goes into the Empire pot every year, and it rolls over and it keeps rolling over until somebody wins the league 2 years in a row. Once you win the league 2 years in a row, you get your first place payout, and then you win the Empire pot. So I believe as we go into next year, our Empire pot's going to be at $3,600. So it's a way to play high-end money for a low-end price. And the other caveat is whoever wins first place in that given year. So the current emperor, who needs to win that second title in a row, that guy can't trade all year, which happens to be me this year. All right.
Yeah. And
my coworkers in the background are giving me a good "oh, good for you." But but it makes it very difficult. You have to build a really good roster, and really the Empire League could go on for years and years. It could go on for decades. In fact, one of the rules that we put into our Empire League that we haven't enforced too well, but we should, is you need to name an heir for your team in the case of your death.
Oh, that's
because
serious.
There's a possibility that there could be 20 grand in this league, and so maybe you need to have somebody next in line. Is it your son you want to take over the team? Is it one of your trusted buddies that you want to take over the team? Maybe it changes along the way.
That is hardcore.
It's a pretty interesting format, and we've had a lot of fun with it. It's definitely been the most fun Dynasty League that I've ever been a part of because of all the little different rules that make it a good time.
Well, and the problem with a lot of Dynasty Leagues is if you kind of have a crappy team, you're 4 years into it, you lose a lot of interest. But at least this keeps guys interested. It's a chance to earn money back down the long run, and even if you're out of it, it keeps you gunning for that guy who's the emperor to make sure he doesn't succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. Last year, actually, I finished near the bottom of our league, and it started rough. It started like an 0-5 season. So I sold all the parts I could to get to Aaron Rodgers, who was injured last year, knowing, hey, I can buy him low now. A team that needs to go to a championship or has a playoff chances is going to need to unload him, and he's going to be a guy that I can bank on next year. So it's a good way to look into the future, and you really want to maximize any potential you have in the playoffs in that given year, because you might not get back to the playoffs the next year. So you have to do everything you can. You kind of have to sell out to try to win if you got a chance. So it makes it interesting. It makes it a good buyer and seller market in the trade market every year going down to the deadline. So we like it a lot. It's really fun.
That sounds like a fantastic idea. I'm interested in that myself. And last thing, we're always trying to, at Pyro, unearth sites and give people strategies and resources during the off-season as well. I know League Safe isn't just about the collecting money and the dues, but you also have the League Safe Post. What can fans find there at League Safe Post?
League Safe Post is kind of our blog that we put up a lot of different stuff relating to fantasy football. More often than not, we have a handful of writers for fantasy football. We do fantasy golf and fantasy baseball stuff too, but not nearly as much as football. So. We got good stuff there. I do the super rankings every week, which is a computer-generated ranking system that's based on a player's stats, the defense he's facing, and a whole bunch of other data inputs that we throw in there. Brian does a weekly daily fantasy article. We have a couple other good writers who put up waiver wire editions and that kind of thing. We're not super huge, and we don't put up stuff as often as some of the bigger sites, but the quality of our stuff is really solid, and I think people really appreciate it and use it as a tool. If you can find it, League Safe Post, bookmark it on your site. You'll like what you see.
Yeah, I can vouch for it. I use it. You guys are putting out some good stuff. Matt, I really want to thank you for your time and sharing a bit of knowledge with us at Pyro here today.
Yeah, no problem.
Once
Good
again,
luck to you guys.
Thank you very much. Matt Harrison from League Safe Post, and the Fantasy Football Weekly Radio Show. This has been Mo, Pyromaniac. We'll catch you next time.